I have so much nostalgia for this movie, Doyle. I really actually love this movie. I understand.
Wow.
Welcome back to Nerd Legion. In case
Hello.
you're not watching on video, Doa is wiggling energetically for you. Imagine what that looks like in your head.
One of my earliest criticisms as an esports caster that I read on Team Liquid, I think it was that this guy bobs his head too much. And so the very next cast for the GSL, StarCraft 2 tournament that I start on, I went like
your
this
neck?
during all my segments. I was like,
Oh, okay.
welcome to StarCraft 2, guys. And I like purposely just bob my head like crazy. It's such a weird critique. I don't think I bob my head any more than anyone else, but I made
it's
sure
actually
to not
true. If you walk next to Doa, he bobs his head like a bird when he walks. It's very weird.
That's right. Yeah. It's I was hatched from an egg with dinosaur and frog DNA combined. Yeah.
Science can't explain
On that note, we're back.
We're back this week talking about Time Bandits, not the Apple TV Plus show that you probably haven't heard of, because no one's actually ever heard of a show on that streaming platform, it turns out. Even though I will say there are quite a few good shows on that streaming platform in particular. I, for one, and we will be doing Severance season 2 whenever it eventually comes out. That show got like murdered by the writer's strike, so it's coming out, I think, next year, but it was 2 or 3 years between seasons. But Severance season 1 was very good, and there's a bunch of other good, especially there's a lot of good sci-fi over on Apple TV Plus. I'm sure we'll be diving into some of that. But first, the reason why we're doing Time Bandits, and no, not the new TV series yet. We will get into that. Once it's complete, we will do our review of that show. But we are going to start off by kicking it old school, Doa. Time traveling back to 1981 when the original Time Bandits was released. So really fun stuff, guys. This is like a childhood favorite movie of mine, so I'm really excited to talk about this. It's by Terry Gilliam, famously from Monty Python, who then went on. And yes, that his most important quality is
famously,
being from Minnesota. But really, he's an excellent director. You guys probably have seen some of his films. If you haven't, what's wrong with you? Brazil, The Fisher King, which is like low-key one of my favorite movies. 12 Monkeys, which is amazing. Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, The Imaginary of Dr. Parnassus. Kind of goes on and on. Very. Yes. The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, like really interesting director. And if you haven't gotten into his work, he's extremely imaginative, very surreal, absurdist comedy a lot of the time. You definitely feel like the vibes from Monty Python within his work, but really a favorite director of mine. And this was his like debut as a director on his own. He did direct some of the Monty Python movies, like pretty famously, Life of Brian, Monty Python, The Holy Grail, Meaning of Life. So like the big Monty Python movies, he was also in the director's chair, but this was kind of his first spinoff, even though it does contain several Monty Python members as part of this, and was co-written by Michael Palin, who is another member of Monty Python. So this was kind of like his transition period, like from Monty Python to the Monty Python movies, to this movie, which contains some Monty Python members, into a bunch of films later on that have nothing to do with Monty Python. So it's a really fun time, I think, in his career. And it's a really, like, I have so much nostalgia for this movie, Doyle. I really actually love this movie. I understand.
Wow.
It's not the greatest movie, but I personally really like it.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. And we come into this in an interesting sort of position, because you have a lot of fondness for this movie, clearly.
Yes.
I saw it maybe like once when I was a kid, like a long time ago. My dad's a big fan of this kind of thing, of Monty Python, all that. And so I know I watched it with him when I was a child, but I hadn't seen this movie for probably at least 30 years or more. So scenes would happen and I'd be like, oh yeah, I remember this now. But I had zero attachment, almost zero recollection of this movie at all. coming into this. So I got to see it fresh. Obviously, I've knew of its existence, and it's been one of those things where I've always like, oh yeah, I should go back and watch that, right? Because I actually haven't seen Brazil, which is the second in Terry Gilliam's like trilogy of imagination, which this is the first of. I've seen the Adventures of Baron Munchausen, Baron von Munchausen. I can't remember exactly what it was.
Baron Munchausen, yeah.
But I didn't see the one in the middle. So now that I've seen this,
great.
now I can
you
go on
should
and
definitely
watch
Brazil. Brazil is
it's
like
another
fire.
one of those things
it's great.
It's been like perpetually on my list, right? Everybody has those films or those books where it's like it's been on my list forever, right? And Brazil's one of those movies for me, and this one kind of was too. So when we talked about doing the Apple Plus show, we were like, well, let's go back and watch the original first. We kind of did that in reverse with Dune, and that was a lot of fun because Dune 1984, the David Lynch one, is just like insane and a ton of fun to watch.
Great.
This one, I watched it and I liked it, but I will lead off my part of the commentary with a quote from Roger Ebert about this, which I know I've learned recently as a meme on the foreplay episodes. And
yes,
and
he's the nemesis of foreplay.
I'm not a Roger Ebert fan. I've disagreed with probably most of what I've heard of his critiques over the years when I look at movies and things. Obviously, he's no longer with us. He passed away some time ago. So I won't speak ill of the dead as much as they will on Foreplay. Go check out that show if you want that. But in this case, I think his quote kind of sums up perfectly my feelings about this. So let me read it. When he did his article in the Chicago Sun-Times for Time Bandits, he said, "I'm usually fairly certain whether or not I've seen a good movie, but my reaction to Time Bandits was ambiguous." And I'm like, that is exactly how I feel. Like, I'm pretty sure I know what's a good movie and what's not, but like with this,
to be clear about Roger Ebert, he definitely has never been clear about what is a good movie or not. Like
sure,
he has no idea what a good movie
forget
is.
Who said it. I just think that sentence, that couple sentences is a good summarization of my feelings about this, where it's like, I'm not really sure what I saw, right? I know it was very Monty Python. It was very, much in that vein. And I generally like that a lot. But there's a lot of things in this movie that I wasn't as big of a fan of. So, I don't know if it aged terribly well. But I did have fun watching it. So I'm really kind of torn, and I'm excited to talk about it with you because I feel like I can sort of digest more my experiences through what you're saying. So I'm excited about this conversation because I'm very like good old Roger Ebert said, I'm very ambiguous on this film right now. Ambiguous, leaning slightly towards good. I wouldn't call this a bad movie at all, but I'm not so sure how I feel about a lot of things with it. It's like, weird, and I usually like weird too, unequivocally.
I think there's like several aspects of this movie that you have to keep in mind when you're viewing it. Is first off, it is a family movie. It's a film for children, so there's not going to be a lot of depth here.
Sort of. It's as much for children as Monty Python gets,
But the thing is, Noah, is like this is cut from the same cloth that a lot of 80s fantasy films were.
Oh, very much.
Right. Yeah, like if you think, compare this to The Dark Crystal or
Labyrinth.
Labyrinth, exactly.
Yeah.
Even movies.
You're right there. Yeah.
Even movies like Krull, right?
Krull? You call Krull the kids movie?
Look, man, it kind of is.
I mean, it's a movie that some would say was made by children, but I think it's I don't know if I would call it a kids film per se.
But what I'm saying is that there is this like wildly creative streak with, and there's a lot of similarity in terms of visiting these fantastic locations. Even The Willow. Even Willow, which we reviewed previously on this show, obviously has a lot of parallels to this. So this was like a really rich time in fantasy genre. And a lot of it was, I think if you look at some of these films today and you think like, it's kind of like a non sequitur a lot of the time, like the weird stuff just pops up and isn't explained. But that was like really what all of these movies were. Like there's not a lot of
time.
Yeah, there's not a lot of like world building. I think when we think about sci-fi or fantasy these days, a lot of people are like, well, I want the explanation for that. Like, I want the deep lore. And like these movies don't give that to you. And there is no deep lore. It's just, here's the location. Isn't it cool? It's fantastical. It's whimsical. It's otherworldly. And the characters are in it. And you just kind of have to accept that premise on its face. Otherwise, these films don't really work.
Well, it's interesting because that premise of here's what you've got for this scene, we're not explaining everything. That is essentially what led to our current age of fantasy and science fiction, where everything needs to be explained because now we have this desire for this deep world building.
Yeah.
So we're looking at all these old properties that we liked in the 80s and 90s, and we're like, I wonder about this. And then now the blanks are being filled in for better or for worse. The power of one,
Worse.
the power of two, the power of many. But I digress. What amazed me first of all with this movie was that it was done on a $5 million budget. They just made an incredible looking film. It was bankrolled by George Harrison as well of the Beatles,
Yes.
which is very interesting. He has a song at the end that confuses a lot of people, but much like a lot of his work. But obviously a great musician. So there's
I mean, he
definitely
was the second worst Beatle, but
sure, but there's very much shades of Beatles in this too, because they
Sure.
did go for a lot of that absurdist kind of
Oh,
fantasy
yeah.
too. So it
Yeah,
fits
Yellow
right in with
Submarine.
that,
Yeah.
right? That kind of psychedelic, absurdist kind of stuff, and very, very British, I guess you could say in a way. But I usually like that stuff. I've been a big Monty Python fan since I was a kid and all that. But yeah, this movie parts of it, I didn't get into as much. I suppose we'll get into that
Well,
as we go through the film.
and also, I think it's important to note that these movies that were made in the 80s are very like straight up good versus evil, super low nuance,
Sure,
very like Judeo-Christian, like here's the devil thinking. You can talk about Legend, which is the Tom Cruise 1985 movie with Tim Curry as well.
There, yeah.
Kroll, I just looked it up though, is rated PG, so it's definitely like
Yeah, but
kid's
PG in the
movie.
1980s was way
It's
different
still-
than PG
anyway,
now. Come on.
my point is it's still like there's not a problem to show
Dude.
a kid Kroll, really.
Sure.
And like
Sure.
Legend, Willow, all these movies, including Time Bandits, is just like, here is the bad guy. In this case, they make no bones about it because the bad guy in this film is literally called evil.
Yeah. It's just the divine being versus evil. But you say there's no nuance, but I think there's a lot of critiquing of the Judeo-Christian myth in this too, where it's
Sure.
is the divine being really all that divine? And
This is
especially when
why
he
this
shows at the
movie is
end.
better than the other ones, Noah. But I'm just saying,
So-
like, these are the
so
tropes.
You were getting there.
These
Okay.
are the fantasy tropes that have been
Sure.
set up in the kind of early to mid 80s that we see with a lot of these movies. And these movies were coming out constantly during this time period. And it is really fun. Like, honestly, like going back as we did with Willow, we could do some of these other movies, Legend.
I love movies from this era.
Yeah.
The Dark Crystal is one of my favorites.
Dark
growing
Crystal.
up.
I
Yeah.
mean, there's a lot of really good stuff that I think. This may be a weird take. I think that a lot of the stuff aged very well. It's a lot of practical effects, but I think in terms of the actual fun of these movies, like I think that's what's great about Time Bandits is it's actually really cool in terms of its sets, its costume design. The effects that it does have, I think, are really interesting. And to me, this movie is much more memorable in terms of visuals than almost any movie that's been released today, because it feels really unique. I will give you a quick summary because I know a lot of you guys have asked for the summary. I would say actually watch this movie. I know a lot of the stuff that we make fun of, like The Acolyte or whatever, like I would not recommend you literally spending time watching that.
You won't be enriched by watching The Acolyte.
But this is a good movie to watch. This is a fun one.
Yeah.
And it also has a banger cast. So it's like, this is just pure cameos of great historical actors, basically, which is very fun. Nobody's in this movie besides, the main squad of Time Bandits and the kid for like longer than 5 minutes. But I guess David
like
Warner's in
vignettes,
it for a while.
basically.
Yeah.
It's almost like a sketch comedy movie,
Yes.
right? Where
Yes,
it's like
is.
it very much goes scene to scene to scene, and again, very very Monty Python-esque, very Holy Grail-esque, very Life of Brian-esque, where each scene is essentially a little self-contained comedy story.
Yes. And so what the plot of this is, as we talk about it, is there are this group of the titular Time Bandits, who are a bunch of little people who they set up as basically servants of the supreme being, who is AKA God, right? And the idea is these people the Time Bandits have been basically making trees.
Kind of Santa's elves a little bit.
Yeah, like
There's a little bit of Santa
exactly.
Claus going on here too. Yeah, but
Yeah.
instead of making toys, apparently in this world, the divine being, aka God, has a bunch of
Helpers that
huge,
make pieces of
yeah,
creation.
right. So they made like trees and shrubs and things,
Yeah.
according to them.
So basically, they are sculptors of the world and inventing new species of plants. They get bored with this and they decide to steal the Supreme Being's map, which has a bunch of what are called time holes that open between different periods of history at various times. And so they use this to navigate and start looting history, which is a very fun concept. Like I love the premise of this is just wonderful. Effectively, like one of these time holes, they're getting chased across time and space by the Supreme Being who's trying to get the map back right. And they end up in this kid's room in the UK, in England. He ends up getting co-opted into this journey with them. They visit various periods, such as Napoleonic, I guess technically Italy, because he's in an Italian city after a battle and like stealing from Napoleon. And they visit various other time periods, the time of Robin Hood, so medieval England, and then they're on the Titanic, and then they're in ancient Greece, like basically the Trojan War era ancient Greece. This is it's a lot of fun to watch. There's a bunch of great actors in here. Not only does Michael Palin make several appearances, you have Shelley Duvall, who many of you probably know from The Shining, who's the mom in The Shining, but she's a very famous actress. So John Cleese's Robin Hood. You have Sean Connery as King Agamemnon. I love Sean Connery. Interesting casting choice, gotta say.
I don't know. He's got the right haircut, I guess. But he's fun. I always enjoyed seeing Sean Connery in things.
Yeah. David Warner, who is a very famous actor, who was the villain in Tron in the early '80s as well. So just really, I think Ian Holm is Napoleon. Ian Holm would go on to play Bilbo Baggins in the Peter Jackson
was foreshadowing.
movies.
That was foreshadowing that he had a destiny as a very famous role as a shorter character. So going right from Napoleon to a Hobbit, that was some premonition right there.
Yeah. So super funny. Anyway, a lot of like they use so they use Ralph Richardson as the Supreme Being, and Ralph Richardson was an extremely famous 20th century stage actor, Shakespearean actor in England. So it's just really well cast. Like it's a lot of people in these little bit roles where I think they really get to shine. It's like a character actor's paradise where you get these get to chew on the scenery as like a historical figure, or and then also you have the central cast of the little people, especially David Rappaport as Randall is fucking great in this movie.
Yeah. Well, the big one is Kenny Baker, famous for being inside R2-D2 for all those Star Wars movies. But he's named Fidget, I think, in this.
Yes.
But what disappointed me when I was looking up IMDb is that the other little people in the cast besides Kenny Baker didn't really go on to do a ton. Which is really unfortunate because they were all really good, legitimately really in this. And I know it was unfortunately a time when a lot of people of that stature were more relegated to the roles of, dwarves and gnomes, or being, like monsters inside masks and things. But I think this movie shows that obviously there's a lot of like, we know, obviously there's a lot of acting talent in that community. And, we see more of that now, but it is too bad to see so much of that in this movie. And then not see a lot of these people go on to do a lot.
I would counter that by saying that honestly, I think probably fantasy movies in this era were some of the best opportunities they had to act. If anything, though, I would say there's a drought between this era and Game of Thrones, basically.
Yeah, for
right?
sure. I guess the difference is now, people from that community have been looked at as more like legitimate actors, which sounds crazy to say, but they aren't just being relegated to the person, the dwarf, the gnome, the
Warwick Davis had a pretty good run during this era.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, totally.
I don't know.
Well, anyway, my point is that I thought they were good actors, and it seemed too bad that they didn't do a lot after this. It didn't seem like many of their careers included too many more appearances and things, according to IMDb at least. That's all I got.
But anyway, like it is a very, I think, unique premise as a result of that. Like they really went hard into this concept of like featuring the little people in a way that I think was really effective and like interesting. And they did have quite a, like, they are the leads in this movie, like straight up. So and there is a lot of like fun comedy elements there and nuance to the characters. So I think it's very enjoyable. Let's start.
What about Kevin? What about the child actor? Tell me what you think of the child actor.
He's terrible, but it's fine.
The map. I don't understand you, Randall. You've got something really brilliant like that, and you're just wasting it.
Wouldn't call this exactly wasting it.
He did his best, yeah, I guess.
Jennifer Connelly is much better in Labyrinth, but she was also older, so it's not exactly.
Yeah, she was like a teenager at that point, right? Yeah, so she was definitely older. Yeah, this kid is more like the Phantom Menace Anakin Skywalker age.
Yeah, he's very wooden. He's not great.
It's tough to find actors that are solid at that age, but it's because they're kids.
So I really like this movie, Doa, but let's start with the segment where we say something mean about this movie. Like, what didn't you like about this?
My main thing that I didn't like about this movie, that I didn't like about Time Bandits, was that it really dragged from the middle of the movie on. I feel like we got to a point where the jokes were kind of played out, the premise was kind of played out. The vignettes past like the 50% mark in the movie didn't really make me laugh anymore. The way they did.
The Titanic one, you could literally just delete from this movie and nothing would be lost.
Yeah. I mean, like, so there's a lot of and that's not to say a lot of the scenarios aren't interesting visually. I mean, visually, this movie is really great from start to finish, but storyline wise, I started to get pretty bored after about halfway through the end of it. And then when I ended, it was kind of like, all right, it ends in a very, Monty Python, Terry Gilliam-esque way, of course. But that's my main criticism with this movie, is that frankly, halfway through, I just got bored. I was just like, all right, I know what this movie is all about now, and the things that are happening now aren't, really making me laugh, which I was kind of surprised about. And they're like swinging across the chasm and all that, and then I'm like, vaguely, I'm like, oh, they're gonna kill one of the Time Bandits here. They're not. I'm like, oh, they are. No, they aren't. No, they aren't. And then later, like, they do, and it's like, well, no, of course God's gonna bring this one back. So maybe I'm going into fake drama a little bit.
That definitely is fake drama.
Fitty's dead.
Dead? No excuse for laying off work.
But
yeah,
my point is that contributed to the boredom that I felt in the last half of this movie. So that's my say something mean. This movie bored me halfway through.
Yeah, I mean, the rest of this, basically, the rest of the plot summary, guys, is that they go through time, the Supreme Being's chasing them. Evil is a creation of the Supreme Being who is trapped in the Fortress of Ultimate Darkness, and so he's trying to find a way out, so he tricks and lures the Time Bandits into the Fortress of Ultimate Darkness in order to steal the map so that he can escape. And start to meddle with creation more actively. In the end, there is a fight between evil and a bunch of people from across time, and then the Supreme Being comes in and Deus Ex Machinas.
It's one of it's Deus Ex God, really. It's Deus Ex Deus almost, but like.
Well, to be fair, Deus Ex Machina does actually refer to the arrival of Greek gods in plays to solve all the problems, which
right, I know, that's why I'm saying it's Deus Ex Deus kind of, yeah. But like, and that is like one of the worst fights. It's because like they can't, like, they bring a bunch of people from history. It's like, yeah, you're fighting Satan. He just makes everybody explode, or like he just destroys them. It's not really even a battle. So I think it's one of those things where it's like you have to remind yourself, like, okay, this is the kids' film. They're having this big fight, but it's not really a fight, but yet we have to have kind of the slapstick crazy action.
I like the kids. I like that scene.
I just thought it was so pointless. I was like, oh, and it goes on for so long too. Like, it's like It goes
Really?
on really, really.
I
Yeah,
like
of
the
course.
scene where Evil is lassoed and then he starts spinning around with the
Yeah.
carnival. It's very Monty Python where
Yeah,
like he starts
that is
spinning around
that
and
one
then
part. Yeah.
and then the arm comes out of his head with the spinning knife and like cuts all the ropes with the lasso. It's so
The
Monty Python with the carnival music.
slimy metallic blade.
Yeah, it's great.
This thing comes out and it unfolds this blade and cuts. Like I
It's
I
so
love
funny.
that.
I love
I
that.
love that. Yeah, that's like I said, visually, this movie does a lot of great things, and I was not expecting that. That was actually part of our next segment. I was going to mention that specifically, but we could talk about a little bit here too, where yeah, that was the one part that stood out. The rest of it though was just a lot of shots of somebody like rotating on a cardboard spaceship, like shoot, 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 that kind of stuff. The directing in these films, there's a lot of very rough zoom ins, things like that, and it's a lot of like extreme emphasis on certain things in the scenery and all that kind of stuff, and it's unique. I'm not sure if I like it or I don't. I think sometimes it works really well and other times it just feels amateurish and jarring, and I feel like there's a lot of that more amateurish feeling use of that in the fight scene later on, whereas early there's a shot where it's like they show the room and then they zoom in on a mirror and it shows him, the mirror shows him going up the stairs like hiding something, and I'm like, that's a great shot. He walks past and then it just does this hard zoom into this mirror or whatever, and I'm like, that's really interesting. It felt so aggressive. So I like that really kind of jarring aggressive camera work if it's done in a really kind of unique way like that. But elsewise, and I think you see this in other stuff like Monty Python and Holy Grail or Life of Brian. Sometimes it works, sometimes it really doesn't work, but it is unique for sure.
Yeah, and let's talk about Monty Python with I've seen that before, because we have seen a lot of this before. And look,
Sure.
it makes sense. I mean, they spend years doing Monty Python on British TV. It's legendary. They make multiple Monty Python movies. So it would be weird not to have like the vestiges of Monty Python with a movie directed by a member of Monty Python, written by two members of Monty Python, starring members of Monty Python, right? And it's certainly also what people expect. Like, I think if you transport yourself back in time, part of the marketing and hype, and this movie was very financially successful, by the way. It was actually a major hit at the time for a relatively low budget. This movie actually made quite a bit of money. And
it was, I believe it was $5 million budget with making $38 million at the box office.
Yeah, that's great. That's huge.
Profits,
yeah, especially for the early 80s. Like that's massive return. And I think probably part of this is British and American audiences had a very good understanding of who Terry Gilliam was, who Michael Palin is, who John Cleese is, right? And these, that name recognition, probably there was hype for a movie that was not Monty Python that is made by these people. It's an instant draw.
Yeah, it's like seeing it's like when you see like Will Ferrell pop up in something these days, right? Everyone knows who Will Ferrell is. Generally, everyone thinks he's a funny actor. So when he pops up in a cameo, that's like, oh, I like this guy. Let's see what funny thing he's going to do. That's how I feel when you see like Michael Palin show up, as the star-crossed lover kind of character, which he has done before in Monty Python many times. So I've seen that before for you.
I mean, yeah, exactly. And like, ain't that the same shit with them literally remaking this? Because it is Taika Waititi of What We Do in the Shadows fame, right? It is Jermaine Clement, who is from Flight of the Conchords, right? Like, these are people who are known for their comedy and their ability to write, very good comedic content. Even like, sketch or musical comedy in the case of Flight of the Conchords, that are now returning to do Time Bandits. So it's kind of the same thing, weirdly, with the same sort of IP.
It's like a new generation of the same vein of humor, or a similar enough vein of humor, taking it on, which I'll give it the benefit of the doubt there. We'll talk about this all later, where like, I don't know how necessary a Time Bandits remake is right now,
Sure.
but if anyone's going to do it, you can see why this crowd would. But the I've seen that before thing, I think the biggest thing I agree is the Monty Python-esque.
What Monty Python elements really stood out to you from this movie?
I mean, I think the really obvious one is the ending, right? Where you just compare this with the ending of Holy Grail. The ending of Holy Grail, the knights just get arrested, and then the movie ends. The cops just show up and arrest them, and you're like, wait, what? That's it. So this one, at the end, the kid finally gets home, and there's a little chunk of evil that remains that wasn't cleaned up when they were supposed to clean up after evil was defeated, and it's in the microwave, and it opens up, and his parents see it, and the boy goes, no, don't touch that, and they both simultaneously put their fingers in and touch it, which is hilarious. But then they explode, and then the movie ends, and that's it.
Mom! Dad! It's evil! Don't touch it!
So just this very abrupt, like, what kind of movie ending is, again, very much in vein with this kind of comedy. It was very funny, but very much, the type of ending where it's like, oh, I've seen this before. The ending that is a non-ending in a sense.
Yeah. And we'll talk more about that. I mean, there's lots of Monty Python elements. Like we said, the like head spinning knife thing. I mean, Terry Gilliam was known for, if you guys don't know, like Terry Gilliam was not one of the more active actors in Monty Python. He was mostly doing,
because he didn't have an accent.
Yeah,
an American accent.
He was doing a lot of the funky, like psychedelic animations. Like he did a bunch of the visual work for them and the directing. So he was more of a, I don't know, aesthetic, like vibes guy for Monty Python. And so it translates really well here. And also obviously to his later work as well. Like if you guys have seen his other movies, it is very surrealist. It is kind of dryly absurd. He's responsible for a lot of the comedic elements in Monty Python. And you do get that kind of like deadpan humor here where, evil is kind of like just blowing people up or turning them into dogs. Like you see the
blowing up the dogs
or blowing up the dogs, which is very funny.
That was, I wouldn't get away with that in a PG movie these days, but
which is very funny. Like, and it's not like shock value when it comes to gore or gross stuff or sex or anything like that. It's shock value in that he flips expectations. Like you expect something more nuanced, but instead when Kevin, for example, at the end of the movie says like, I'm gonna burn the map if you don't get rid of these people, he's like, okay, and he just kills them all. He just blows them all up. It's pretty funny actually. Like which it fits the character.
Totally, yeah, it totally does fit a character that who is essentially Satan, aka evil, right? So it totally fits that he would just do that, right? Has no love at all for his lackeys, But and that's shock value done in like a proper comedic way, right?
Yeah.
Where it's shocking as in unexpected, not shocking as in, oh, that really just grossed me out, and I guess that's shocking, the boys, I'm talking to you. So it is refreshing to see shock humor used in an actual shocking way. But going back to Terry Gilliam and his animations and things, like the easiest one to point out is the theme song for Monty Python's Flying Circus, right?
Yeah.
And he has this trend of taking a lot of organic things that become mechanical things, right? Whether it's a foot that opens up and like a parasol comes out, or in this case, it's almost like he took a lot of those animations and translated those into a live action setting, right? So you have evil spinning around, and then his head opens up, and this big, mechanical thing comes out, and it like a knife unfolds.
With the carnival music, right? Which is like peak Monty Python, Monty Python.
So it's interesting to see the mind from those animated segments be put towards a live action version of that, and that was really fun. Same thing with like the sequence with the giant with the ship on his head, right? Where you would have, that's a very, you could totally envision this as an animation in your head where you have a boat sailing around suddenly,
or a skit from Monty Python.
Or it gets lifted out of the ocean by the head of a giant, right? Who comes stepping around, he steps, and then there's a house there and he steps on the house. You could totally picture this in that animation style that Terry Gilliam was known for. So a lot of this is, putting that in the live action. Now, I think, unfortunately, in a live action setting, it loses a lot of its punch because everything has to be done at live action speeds. And so the punchy quickness of those animations is slowed down to an excruciating crawl in a live action setting. So do I think this works in live action as well as it does in animation? Definitely not. I think this style of thing works much better in animation, but it is interesting to see it in a live action setting. it's cool that that opportunity was there, you know.
I like the like ship on the head sequence, right?
Yeah, it's
I
cool. It's
like
too long. It's all
it's
too long.
that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
It definitely could have been cut down a little bit. Um, we have seen a lot of these elements before, and like this is just part of his career as an artist. So I don't think it's a knock on him. Like one of the reasons why Monty Python was wildly successful is because this style of comedy that he does was both really unique for the era in which they were doing. It's still unique, I would argue. Like Monty Python has a quality to it that really hasn't been able to be replicated by anybody else in terms of absurdist comedy. Like they really were like god tier at it.
I mean, those brains only existed in those humans. Like you can't recreate that, you know. Like you can't copy that brain. Like the only brains that would ever come up with that are those brains, right?
Yeah. So my point is when we do, I've seen this before. There's going to be segments of this where it's like boring. I don't hate watching more Monty Python moments in this film. I find them interesting still.
Sure. I just think it's stretched on for too long. But yeah, that's I get, you know, again, I feel like this movie is so interesting that you can forgive a lot of it, you know. Like I said, I wouldn't call this movie bad. Obviously it was reviewed pretty well when it came out, but it just does drag.
I mean, it's not Terry Gilliam's best film either. Like it just isn't. You know what I mean? Like if you take a look at his actual oeuvre of his work, I mean, he gets better later. Like Brazil's a better movie than this one. Imaginary of Dr. Parnassus is a better movie than this one, right? Yeah. I think if you actually look at peak Terry Gilliam, people would probably say 12 Monkeys is his best movie. It's really fucking good. Maybe you think Fear and Loathing is like, but you know, he gets there, but this is really the start of his journey as a more independent artist. And this is kind of the bridge film into some of the stuff that I think is better later on.
I will say I'm just very glad that something like this was made, because this is the type of movie that just wouldn't get made, you know, today, it seems like. It's and I mean, you know, maybe it wouldn't have been made back then if George Harrison wouldn't have, you know, funded a lot of it too. It's hard to say, but I feel like the 80s were that time, going back to what we were talking about earlier, where you got a lot of this extremely imaginative fantasy that happened, you know, where studios and, you know, we're willing to take more risks on this type of stuff. Maybe that doesn't apply to this movie in particular, but it's in that same sort of like era that a lot of this was happening. So I'm glad it got to be made, because we don't get enough stuff that's this creative that's made now, you know, I think. So I appreciate that. And I think that's the main thing about this movie, is that the limitless creativity that exists within this film is just really special.
Yeah. I'm gonna take a break here, Doa, and rant about history for a little bit.
Yeah, go for it.
Because I love this.
Oh, okay.
I love this movie. Right. But we are going to introduce a new segment this week called "History is Ruined," where I talk about like. I love the imagination of this movie. I don't need history to be entirely accurate in a fucking fantasy movie, guys. But I will tell you that it is like incredibly sus. For like really hilarious reasons. And I wish that they had done some like different things, particularly in the ancient Greece scenes. So first off, like the Napoleon shit is obviously just like intentionally over the top. By the way, guys, Napoleon wasn't really short, which is like, I found it kind of boring because the entire Napoleon segment, even though I enjoy Ian Holmes' portrayal of Napoleon, is just like short jokes about Napoleon, and it just kind of gets tired and boring. And it, you know, rather silly. So it just deals in stereotypes, which, you know, we don't really talk about Napoleon being that short anymore as like core feature of his identity. But it is true that during the 80s and 90s, there were a lot more jokes about Napoleon being
such a common joke. That was the main thing. Like nowadays, do people even know who Napoleon is? Like,
Ridley Scott just made a Napoleon movie, so more people than did. They did, but
maybe. The movie's huge on TikTok, I heard too.
No. They're all freaks. Not one of them under 5'6". What kind of theater are you running, huh? That's what I like. Little things hitting each other.
But yeah, I thought that was like a little wacky. But I gotta go into the ancient Greece scene still, because like
you just gotta.
I can't not talk about this.
I know. I know you can't not talk about that. Go ahead. Where do you want to start?
Because, okay, let's start with the fact that they're clearly not even fucking in ancient Greece. Like, they are obviously in Morocco. Because I've been to Morocco. I've been in the Atlas Mountains where a lot of these films are filmed. And it is, Mycenae is a part of Greece that, I don't know, looks like Greece, guys. It's like rolling green hills, lots of vegetation. They're just in a fucking Moroccan desert, in like an obviously Moroccan village. Like, it doesn't look Greek at all.
Yeah, and why is he fighting the Minotaur out in the desert instead of in a labyrinth on Crete? Tell me that. Exactly. Answer me that. Yeah.
Also, he's Agamemnon and not Theseus. I mean, there's like a million problems with this.
Why is the Minotaur undead?
Why is the Minotaur undead? Is it even a Minotaur, or is it just a man with a decaying bull skull?
No,
head on his head.
It is a Minotaur because he cuts off. You see the severed head, and
that's
it's all like, yeah. It's so
maybe
it is
the man's head is inside the bull helmet.
I mean, it must have been strapped in there really well. Then when he flips it over, you can see it. Not the head, but you can see like a severed neck.
Yeah, but it just starts in the middle of this completely unexplained fight where Kevin just falls on him while he is, fighting the Minotaur. Agamemnon defeats the Minotaur, and then he just goes back to Mycenae, we assume, which again looks nothing like historic Mycenae. Mycenae very famously had a large stone wall around it and was considered like an impregnable fortress in the Bronze Age. And this is, we're talking this is Agamemnon was a mythological figure who existed in the Trojan War era, right? This is in like the age of Greek mythology. So it would have been hundreds of years before you think about Sparta and Athens as we know them historically. But Mycenae was a real place, and it was a Bronze Age superpower in Greece, and it looked nothing like this. And on top of that, Doe, what I find so hilarious is, there are all these servants that are wearing those gold masks, right? Throughout this scene. That is a real mask, guys, that they found in Mycenae, called the Mask of Agamemnon. But it's like flattened because it had been buried. And so they're wearing flattened masks, which is just like, what the fuck? Why would you wear a flat mask? Like, it would have been shaped like the face of the person it was on, right? So it
does look kind of freaky that way, though. I kind of like it artistically. That's a cool, I think that's a neat choice vibe-wise. But
yeah, and it was a real mask it was a funerary mask where they just walking around wearing flat masks. Like, no, which is funny. But I think the funniest part of this Doa for me is that, so first off, Sean Connery with his Scottish accent, which is just like peak Sean Connery. And you just have to ignore that in every movie Sean Connery's in. I love Sean Connery. I think he's fucking epic as a Russian submarine captain with a Scottish accent in The Hunt for Red October. I love him as James Bond. Love this guy. I think he's wonderful.
Yeah.
But it is super funny. He's like, I'm Agamemnon with his like Scottish accent. It is as
welcome
usual.
to ancient Greece. I'm Agamemnon.
Exactly.
You want to learn about gladiators, my boy?
To be in your own home, be with your own father, mother.
No.
Very well then.
I can stay?
We'll decide that tomorrow.
Also, though, what I find really funny is if you know Agamemnon mythology, so you know how he takes Kevin the kid and he tries to make him his heir for no reason, by the way. He's like,
he's all into this too.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to go back to his parents.
I mean, why would you? His parents are just like losers.
Plastic on their furniture. That kind of tells you all you need to know about them.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
But he if you know Agamemnon's history, you don't have a lot of choices here about what is going to happen next. Like, regardless, if Kevin stays, something fucking horrible is going to happen to Kevin, by the way, because if you guys know, Agamemnon's family has some pretty rough times, either behind them or ahead of them, and you don't want to be involved in those rough times. Because I assume that this is supposed to happen before he goes off to Troy. And if he goes off to Troy, so first off, Agamemnon is like a famous douche in Greek mythology. But second, Noah, the thing about being Agamemnon's son is this. Agamemnon's son ends up killing Agamemnon's wife / his mother Orestes. And then there is literally a 3-play cycle written about how the Furies are trying to murder Orestes for the crime of killing his own mother. So it gets real dark. So I'm just sitting here laughing the whole time, being like, I don't think you want to be Agamemnon's son, bro. Like, you need to leave now before the bad shit starts happening. Yeah,
that might
sure.
be the joke. Like, what he doesn't want to leave, but yet anyone who's a student of history kind of knows, or a student of mythology at least, kind of knows what is in store for Agamemnon's son. I think that might be the joke there. But.
Right, because you get into the sacrifice of Agamemnon's daughter so that they can get to Troy safely, which then pisses off Clytemnestra, who's his wife, which then causes this like crazy drama when he gets back home. So the whole thing just turns into a complete shit show, and it's to the point where people like the house of Agamemnon is considered cursed. Right.
Yikes.
Yeah, it's bad.
I mean, they lost all their jewelry at a party. That's kind of cursed right there.
Yeah, exactly.
That starts
so
it off.
out of all of these mythological figures you could have picked, I did find it funny that they had picked this one, right?
Yeah.
So it is hilarious if you understand the history, and like they tried to use the historical artifacts. They used a very weird set for this that I don't think read as ancient Greece at all. What it reads as is ancient Middle East, North Africa, like with all the stucco and everything like that. So I just thought it was a strange choice. Everything about those scenes was strange, and then the Time Bandits come and they just loot everybody's possessions and disappear.
Yeah. Some of the masks they're wearing too are references to, old masks found in Greek excavations and things too. So there's a lot of little nods to various, art from that era, I guess, and all that. That's kind of neat to see. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like you kind of just feel bad for Agamemnon at the end of it, where it's like he thinks he's found this boy to adopt in the air and all that. And then not only does he lose that, he loses his crown, all his valuables. Not a good day for Agamemnon. And what a letdown right after killing the Minotaur. Man. It's like this whole movie is like a larcenous Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure is what it really is like, as far as
it is
as far as its inclusion of Napoleon and ancient Greece. And,
I mean, to be fair, in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, they just kidnap people instead of stealing objects. So I don't know.
That is true. Yeah, I mean, they do.
They're committing felonies
theft,
either way.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Yeah.
The parallels to Bill and Ted's are like very funny in this, though.
There is a lot, yeah. Speaking of history, do you have any more? Is Greek history ruined in any other ways you'd like to discuss?
I mean, it was thoroughly ruined by like literally all of those things. I don't know. Okay. That's the end of the scene. Like literally every aspect of that entire Greek scene was ruining Greek history.
Well, one of my favorite scenes was the John Cleese Robin Hood scene in Middle Ages, because everyone else, all his like bandits are all his criminals are all these like dirty thugs who just are, like they're just the filth of humanity. And then John Cleese comes out in this like super clean, brightly colored, like children's stage play Robin Hood outfit. And he's just super friendly.
Hello, I'm Hood.
It's Robin Hood.
Say good morning, you scum. Good morning. You're all robbers.
Oh, the best, Mr. Hood.
And I thought that was a great contrast. And he greets the Time Bandits like a politician, kind of. Though jolly good kind of thing, where he's really clearly not listening to them.
Yes.
It's great. I love that scene. And we jury's out on if Robin Hood was a real person or not, all that stuff, right? So nothing really ruined theirs as far as I'm concerned. What would you say?
I mean, Agamemnon probably wasn't a real person either, so.
Well, there you go. Yeah, mythology is mythology, right? So Napoleon, real person. Don't you just love those all the firing squads in the children's film?
As somebody with a son who might watch this someday, I was thinking about when I was watching that, how I would explain that to him, right? But they are just executing people wantonly in the Napoleon scene.
Well, Steve, he liked to round up people that disagreed with him and shoot them.
Yep.
It's all like it is.
But but see, it was silly because he just had a complex about being small.
There you go. Yeah, Ian Holm again. He does a great job too. He's
Yes, he does.
He really, everybody in this movie really puts their all into these roles. He does. He sends it. Ian Holm never goes halfway. Ian Holm is 100% into every role he's in, and I love it.
Alexander the Great, whose empire stretched from India to Hungary 1 inch shorter than me. Charlemagne. Dumpy little 5-footer.
The duo of I feel like we should bring up the historically repeating duo of Michael Palin and Shelley Duvall being these sort of like star-crossed Victorian lovers, no matter what era they're kind of in, falling head over heels with each other. But he's always got some weird issue that
it's a very Monty Python sketch moment, right?
It is, and it's a very Michael Palin sketch to begin with. Like, he's done very similar things in the past, and it was cool seeing Shelley Duvall in this. She passed away recently, which is sad to hear. I recognize her mostly from Fairy Tale Theater, which is this series that ran on PBS in the 90s, where she was this host for these like 1 hour long recreations of fairy tales. Essentially, sometimes she would star in them, sometimes she wouldn't, but they were all very, very on the darker side and very interesting, and very much stuff in this vein. They were very weird now that I go back and look at them, but I love them as a kid. So, and I don't think of Shelley Duvall as the person in The Shining, even though that's arguably the role she's known the most for. I think of her as the host of Fairy Tale Theater. But funny enough, also, I'm pretty sure, is she also in Suburban Commando?
I haven't seen it.
That's a Hulk Hogan movie. Yeah, she is. She's Christopher Lloyd's wife in Suburban Commando, the movie where Hulk Hogan is this like science fiction. He's like this space commando, basically, who is made to go on vacation because he's just been working too hard. So his boss makes him go on vacation to Earth and just lie low, but then trouble follows him there. It's actually like one of my favorite films from when I was a kid.
No, I've never even heard of these fucking movies.
You've never heard of Suburban Commando? Oh my gosh. Well, I also made Monty watch Surf Ninjas a while ago.
We'll watch Suburban Commando.
We gotta watch Suburban Commando now.
I'm now intrigued. I've literally never even heard of this movie. And it has Christopher Lloyd, Hulk Hogan, and Shelley Duvall in it. I'm kind of in. I'm kind of in on this one.
And the Undertaker and the Bushwhackers. Like there were like a bunch of wrestlers in this too. So
amazing.
Yeah, it's an incredible film. When I say incredible film, I mean incredible from a Doa kind of view. Incredible film. I'm being clear about that. But, and like I said, Hulk Hogan back in the news recently with a big appearance at the Republican National Convention. So it's couldn't be a better time to revisit some of his cinematic masterpieces, right? Like 1991's Suburban Commando. That's right. I'll send you the trailer after we finish recording this, Monty.
Incredible.
You're welcome in advance.
I will watch it. We'll put that on the list of when we have a slow week in terms of up and coming stuff to talk about that.
Hidden gems in the 90s.
let's talk about the end using a segment we call "My Childhood is Ruined," which normally. We would refer to our own childhoods being ruined by people who are, actively shitting on things that we love or the IPs that we love. But this time, it's because Kevin's childhood is actually literally ruined in a hilarious way.
Yeah. This time, it's the child in the movie whose childhood is ruined. He's abducted by criminals. He's in a bad home situation. His parents clearly don't care about him. They're very much keeping up with the Joneses types.
Well, and by the way, I will say, like, this is actually one of my favorite aspects of Terry Gilliam as a filmmaker is that the themes that start in Time Bandits are incredibly pervasive through the rest of his work, especially in the 80s. Mm-hmm. Like, if you watch Brazil, it is kind of an expansion upon these ideas where, effectively, he is thumbing his nose at, as you say, Doa, keeping up with the Joneses, the idea of this kind of like the pursuit of ease of living. The pursuit of appearances is a huge theme in Brazil.
Well, this was a big critique on the whole 1960s being all about it's the future. It's the car of the future. It's the kitchen of the future. I've seen if you've watched as much Mystery Science Theater 3000 as I have and Riff Tracks and all that, one of the things I love to go back and do are these short films from that era where it's
Yes.
talking about how this new kitchen will change your life. It's the best thing that's ever been created for mankind. And so that theme is very much a response to
Right.
that attitude where it's like materialism is what brings you forward. Like, sure, it's under the guise of this is progress, but what it really is marketing, right?
Yes. And also, I mean, a lot of these things that they were doing, because, for example, a lot of these kitchen inventions in the 60s, there was a huge push towards TV dinners, you know, frozen food and
automation.
Automation. We know now, obviously, that this stuff is just not good for you. Like it's not. But it was seen as really visionary at the time, and there wasn't really a focus on health. There was a focus on ease and saving time, right? And you get to see that because if they're obsessed, they're this kind of middle class family that's obsessed with, you know, these, like you mentioned earlier, Joe, these horrible like plastic covers on their furniture, this absurd game show that they're watching. Like their entire world is just vapid and easy. And Terry Gilliam repeatedly throughout all of his films is commenting on this aspect of culture, of modern culture. He really does shine a very bright light on, hey, you like basically wake up people, like, look at this kind of lifestyle that's being pushed to you. Look at the life that you're living. And he contrasts that with a lot of characters within these movies that do break out of that. You know, it's the child who his interests are in history. Like he's reading these books and he's trying to engage his dad about, wow, look how cool ancient Greece is. And he's studying on his own and he's getting excited about something. And he's just
particularly
pushed off to the side.
With battle and death, though, which I feel like does come back to haunt him later, right?
It's a boy
thing.
But
it's like, you know, then at the end he's rewarded with his parents dying in front of him, right? So it's like, you know, he has this sort of like,
sure,
you know, glorious thoughts of battle and death and ways to kill. That's the thing he's trying to tell his dad about the movie, is all these different ways, you know, the gladiators, whatever, Spartans were taught to kill people, you know, and then, you know, has
the Greek
experiences.
hoplites, yeah.
Right. He has a lot of experience with death throughout the film. And I think that's kind of his lesson, is it's maybe not as glorious as he thought, but it's done in sort of a very darkly way.
But I do think, you know, he is shown to be very knowledgeable about time periods. He's clearly interested in history.
For sure.
And you
Those
know,
are positives. Yeah.
he's interested in real adventure. Like he is not interested in just sitting there and watching this vapid game show on the TV or discussing like the latest kitchen appliance that's going to save them, you know, a minute, that, you know, his mother is obsessed with. And they're shown as having this, you know, the whole central plot, even up to the end, is when they're trying to lure when evil's trying to lure the Time Bandits in on top of that labyrinth. It's like, it's that 80s television commercial of, here's the new shiny product that you must eat. And this is seen as like the ultimate reward, right? And that is a social commentary, right? They are shown stealing the fucking Mona Lisa. And at the end of the day, the ultimate reward that draws them in, like the ultimate bait that gets the Time Bandits excited, is this like commercial, right? And I think that's a really powerful message, honestly, right?
But before they collect their prize, let's just have a look at what made it possible for them to be here with us tonight. The map, please.
That is seen as the most desirable thing, not because it is, but because that's how it's marketed to you. And there is this like sheen of marketing. I also love the visual call outs. For example, Evil, not only is he the host of the game show, but he also, you'll notice, covers his minions in that same transparent plastic that's on the furniture as if he's trying to preserve them, right? Which I think is very funny. I think it's a very funny visual after seeing it all over the chairs and couches.
It's a good sort of indication that his parents have been corrupted, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
Where they're treating their furniture in the same way, because essentially he treats his minions like furniture, right? He doesn't value them any more than he would a chair or something, you know? So yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. That's funny.
It's really funny, I think.
Yeah. It's great.
And it is all about the veneer. And at the end of the day, the kid is having a much more rich life than his parents could possibly dream of, because they're just stuck in this mental cycle of the modern era and what is being presented to them on television.
Yeah, it's kind of like the life of ease is sort of the death of creativity,
Yeah, and that is hugely part of Terry Gilliam's everything he does, right? A lot of the narratives that he pushes in his films are the main characters breaking out of social norms. You see this in like every possible way. Like 12 Monkeys, it's like about mental institutions, right? Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, it's about drugs. It's absolutely everywhere. And I think that's what's fun is like Terry Gilliam really is a guy who explores magic and the imagination. Like that is key to who he is. And he's very critical of people who have basically forsaken their imaginations to just be spoon-fed garbage, intellectual garbage. And I love that about him. I do. So, but as for the childhood being ruined, like obviously at the end when he comes back and he watches his parents explode and the fire truck leaves and the movie just ends. It's like, I guess he's an orphan now. But I love the ending to this, though, because you're almost like, I wonder if he's better off this way, right?
Well, it's like you wonder if he's sort of getting what he wants, right? Because he's all too eager to, stay in history with Agamemnon and never go back to his parents too. So, he at the end but yet he's sort of trying to get home still, and then he tries to tell his parents to not like touch the piece of evil or whatever. But then at the end it's like, yeah, well, if they're gone, then does he get his adventure? Now he's pushed into that realm of extreme creativity and imagination just to survive.
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, God doesn't care about him, which is hilarious. Like God's basically.
Well, that's the other part of the commentary too.
Yeah, I'm just leaving, right? And also, he just. I mean, it's ham-fisted, but he just like hand waves away, like, he's like, oh, next you're going to be asking about why the necessary evil is like something about free will or whatever, and then he's just like, I must go where people need me, and then it's not very nuanced. I mean, this is a kids movie, but. I'm actually surprised I'm actually surprised they even broach that in a kids movie, but they don't do a good job of handling it.
Why did they have to die?
Might as well say, why do we have to have evil?
Oh, we wouldn't dream of asking a question like that, sir.
Yes, why do we have to have evil?
I think it's something to do with free will.
And then he's like, come with me, my minions. You are forgiven with a pay cut. And then he just like vanishes and he just leaves Kevin there. I mean, God is seen as both very like apathetic and somewhat Machiavellian, because he says, oh, I let you guys have that map so that we could destroy evil because for funsies for me, basically.
And like the apathetic God is sort of the God of choice in comedy. If you look at comedy across the decades, kind of that's the one that works the best, I would say, where divine being but also divinely apathetic in a way too, kind of just using the earth as a plaything, essentially. So
and that's where he's left. So Kevin's just left with no parents and a burned down house and a God who doesn't give a shit. Like, it's pretty grim.
Yeah, kids movie. Yeah,
I love the ending though. They just don't pull a punch. They're just like, it's over now. Goodbye.
Yeah, I mean, like I said,
why is Sean Connery here again? Nobody knows.
That's which movie are you talking about now? But The Rock. But anyway,
how dare you speak ill of The Rock, sir?
Well, welcome to The Rock. Anyway, it's and again, the easy comparison is the end of Monty Python, The Holy Grail, where it does just end. And like, again, it's the shock comedy, right? Where it's like it's not even a cliffhanger. It's just a non-ending, but that's just it. And it's just supposed to make you be like, oh, okay. And give you that sort of bemused sort of, I guess, feeling as you exit the theater, right? But also kind of make you wonder. It's a conversation starter too, because everyone who watches it with you is going to be like, well, what do you think happened? So I think it serves the movie well in that sense too, in that it makes you want to talk about it after it's over, which I think is something movies should probably do. So yeah, that's cool.
So before we go into the TV series, Noah, what are your final thoughts on this movie? Because like, I think it's worth watching. Like, it is flawed, but like, it's really fun to watch. And yes, I agree with you. It drags at times, but I never regret. I watch this movie every few years, and I never regret watching it because it is really unique in a lot of ways. And I think that it tries really hard to do some cool shit. And even if that cool shit like drags on, it's still really fun. And I like all the performances and the vignettes.
I think it visually surprises you over and over again, and that's great. And I think that's a reason to watch this film. I would definitely recommend it to people to see. But I do think the visual side of it overstays its welcome in nearly every scene too, and it does drag. I'll say it again. It does get, in my opinion, boring a little over halfway through if you don't count the visual stuff, right? And again, there's a big visual thing that happens, but then it stays for too long. But that said, I think again, like just visually, conceptually, one of the most interesting films I've seen in a long time. I can't. I'm surprised now that I've watched it again that it didn't have more of an impact on me when I saw it as a kid, because a lot of other similar movies did have more of an impact on me, whether it was Monty Python and the Holy Grail, or just straight up episodes of Monty Python's Flying Circus, which I would have watched around the same time as this, or Suburban Commando. Just very visually rich movies.
Yeah,
but
Doa literally prefers Surf Ninjas to this, and this is like a bazillion times better than Surf Ninjas.
Absolutely, I would watch Surf Ninjas again over this, and that's just me. But I have my love for Surf Ninjas in the same way you have your love for Time Bandits. It's an unreasonable, childish love, right, for these films because of the feelings they make us feel. So those feelings aside, I think Time Bandits is a pretty fun movie, and yeah, I'd easily recommend it to people. It's there's just nothing quite like it. There's definitely things it shares DNA with, but there's nothing quite like it. So it's cool.
So let's do one final segment. How does it end? Where we theorize, because we have yet to watch the TV series, but we are going to watch the TV series. And I think the concept of this is rich. And again, this was a commercial success, and maybe there are a bunch of people out there like me that have a lot of nostalgia for this film, but it is a very weird IP to resurrect.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's like, this movie is over 40 years old. There hasn't been anything with this intellectual property in the interim. It was Terry Gilliam's first directorial debut, not doing Monty Python. It is a very, very weird intellectual property to resurrect. And maybe Taika Waititi has like the same nostalgia I have for this one. But I don't know why this is the project that they would bring back. So we are going to speculate about how this actually ends.
Yeah, so if anyone was, going to bring it back, it'd be definitely Taika Waititi and his crew, of course. But it seems like it's very much in their vein. We talked about that earlier, but I kind of suspect it will go the way of that Dark Crystal show that was on Netflix, Age
I didn't
of
see that.
Resistance or something like that.
It was good though.
It was good. Nothing has been made with that level of puppetry in a long, long time. And it's great. I thought the story was compelling too, it being a prequel to the Dark Crystal. I thought that was kind of how the Skeksis came to power and all that. But it was interesting. It was very cool. But it was really for people like me who liked the Dark Crystal growing up. And while this movie is legendary, it's not widely loved per se. It's more niche, And I think sometimes the people who are in charge of these things, the very Hollywood people, respect these properties for what they did in a cinematic sense, in a genre sense, but don't really realize that these movies are niche and that they didn't have as big of an impact on the world as they think they did, because they are just so absorbed with it, and all their friends who like the same things are absorbed with it. And those are the people who decide
they
what
like the
gets
deep
made.
cuts. They like the deep cuts.
And those are the people who decide what gets made sometimes, and so I suspect this will go the same way, where it might be good, but it doesn't really matter if it's good or bad because it's niche enough that it's probably not going to get watched a lot. Taika Waititi obviously has a lot of star power with him. Who's why am I blanking on the name of the person that played Phoebe in Friends?
Lisa Kudrow.
Lisa Kudrow, right? She's in this. I think she brings a lot of star power to it because she's a
Jermaine Clement's in it, who obviously is going to be appealing to people as well.
Sure, but again, Flight of the Conchords stuff he's been in more.
What We Do in the Shadows is very successful.
Yeah, sure. If they watch the New Zealand version and not one of the other remakes, right? So we'll see. I suspect that this will probably be pretty decent, but not wildly successful. At the same time, I'm interested to see how they're going to take the story, because I don't know if I don't think you can just remake this. I feel like you have to kind of alter it. It has to be sort of like an adaptation more than a remake, right? of the story.
I mean, the concept of this is good because, like,
yeah, I think you take the
even-
concept. Yeah,
I don't really understand why they call it. I mean, Time Bandits is a great name. Actually, I do understand. It's just a great name.
the bandits
and
in time.
yeah, and also the concept is obviously super good. You know, time traveling thieves is. I think you can do a lot with that and a lot of different things. So I will say, though, I don't actually know how this ends. I know nothing about this show. I haven't watched a preview. I haven't watched an episode yet. So I am interested for sure knowing what Time Bandits is, but I also know that it just can't be a Terry Gilliam movie. And even though Terry Gilliam isn't an executive producer and like to some level I'm sure has participated in this, it is weird that this is what they're doing, and I don't know how it's going to end because they could take this in 10 different directions if the only crossover is like, here are some people who travel time stealing things.
Yeah. I mean, so Lisa Kudrow plays the leader of the Time Bandits, basically, and she's got the trademark red jacket that the leader does in the movie, the old movie. It doesn't seem like the Time Bandits are a group of little people in this one. So they've made that choice to change from a squad of little people for the Time Bandits to regular sized people, I guess, which was an interesting decision. But you know, we'll see what happens, I guess. I don't know. I watched the trailer. It seemed okay. You know, we'll see what happens from there. I don't know.
We'll get our review when it's fully out, guys. We're not
I
going to
didn't get a good sense of it, honestly. It didn't look bad, but it didn't look great.
We're not going to kind of do the early review, and we'll do a final show review when it's all finished being released, guys. So I am curious. As somebody who likes Time Bandits and who generally likes what Apple TV has done, I think that this will probably be worth a watch for us, and we'll let you know if it's worth a watch for you as well. We will be back with some modern stuff next week as House of the Dragon concludes. So we will do another watch along for you guys of the final episode of this season of House of the Dragon. And then we will review the entire season of House of the Dragon as we did, except only with the first 3 episodes. We got back to that. So return to the House of the Dragon next week, guys. We'll see you then.